So does it have psychological effects? And yes, it does. And this was a very interesting graphic that TA presented once. I was like, oh wow. And it's very interesting. It's showing like all of these different changes in different parts of the cycle. But what are the big key players in this infographic? Estradiol and progesterone. So rather than, yeah, adverse symptoms come from the hormone fluctuations in the blood loss. And yes, that's why I showed you the hormones, because all these hormones are affecting things. They're affecting the physiology of the myometrium, physiology of the endometrium. Now we're going to talk about the effects of estradiol and progesterone on the brain. So I was trying to look up the facts on this. I was like, where this is very interesting, but is this just like some sort of like Facebook or Instagram post, or does it actually have science behind this? So what we have is that yes, estradiol and progesterone does have neurological effects. Namely, they affect neurotransmitters. So estradiol and progesterone, these are the primary steroid hormones in play in terms of like effects on mood. So what we have with estradiol, so estradiol stimulates the activity of multiple neurotransmitters. Now, these might sound familiar if you were here in PHYL 141. I'll cover them very briefly. So serotonin, this is why we have things like SSRIs, and why people say like my molecule of serotonin, right, is trying to get me through the day. This is my feel happy one, right? Well, serotonin, very important neurotransmitter, and among things, it affects mood, appetite, and sleep. A lack of serotonin or having too much serotonin can affect all these negatively. So this is why some people who have like major depressive disorder, they might have a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor to increase the levels of serotonin in their brain. Now, dopamine, this is the one we associate with rewards and pleasure and hedonism. So what we have here, two feel-good hormone or neurotransmitters, and they're both increased by the estradiol. Now, glutamate in general, and it is the glutamate as in monosodium glutamate or amino acids glutamate. So, but as a neurotransmitter, it's generally excitatory, so it kind of increases overall neuronal activity. So what's the take-home message with estradiol? Well, you have a lot of feel-good feelings from serotonin and dopamine, but you also have increase in energy. So this is what due to the glutamate. So this is why roughly estradiol's effects on the brain can be considered like positive, feel-good moods. That's why I put like positive moods and energetic effects. Now, what about progesterone? So progesterone does affect dopamine. So it does stimulate dopamine release, but in certain areas including the striatum of the brain, and the striatum is one of many reward centers in the brain. So progesterone is going to increase that feel-good thrill of that pleasure-seeking dopamine. It also enhances the effects of gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA for short. So compared with glutamate, progesterone is more about, so GABA is more about calming things down. It's generally inhibitory in most synapses. So instead of being really exciting, it's going to be a little more calming. So this is why that previous infographic, they said that progesterone, especially after ovulation, is kind of calming. So what does it do? Well, again, if you're going to say, if you're overstimulated, maybe you might be anxious. GABA in general is going to dial that down, tell you to calm down and inhibit those neurons. So GABA in general has anti-anxiety effects. So what thing is that a lack of progesterone is going to have, progesterone is kind of like a, I've also heard it informally referred to as like the body's natural antidepressant in terms of like the endocrine system. And it's also anti-anxiety due to GABA and also stabilizing effects. Sometimes it actually not so much like decreases things altogether, but more balances. It's kind of like a balancer or what we call a modulator. So what we have here, estradiol, feel good, energy, progesterone, well, it's antidepressant. It's going to keep your mood stabilized. It's going to calm you down. Now, what happens if you have a lack of estradiol? Well, you're going to have a lack of serotonin and dopamine, so you're going to lose those feel-good neurotransmitters, and you're going to have a little less energy. Why? Because of the lack of glutamate. But what if you have a drop in progesterone? Well, now you might be a little less, your mood might not be as well, or you might not be in as good of a mood, right? Because why? Lack of progesterone stimulates, well, will mean a lack of progesterone will mean a lack of dopamine. But what happens is, like, if you have a lack of progesterone, it's also going to lose this anti-anxiety effects. So now you have more depression, more anxiety. Where do we have a drop in estradiol and progesterone? And where do we see an experience in negative emotions, a lack of energy, increase a less happy mood, and more anxiety? Oh, let's see. Where do we have that? Oh, maybe just before menstruation, right? And gee, what should we call this? Maybe we should call it syndrome when all these feel moods occur. Maybe we should call it a premenstrual syndrome. And why does that happen? Well, it's due to these two hormones crashing. You have these feel-good hormones; they're always there to some extent during the proliferative and secretory, and have those during those phases. But when these hormones that feel good come crashing down, that's what causes the symptoms of PMS. And I can't attest to it personally, but the women who have shared it with me, they said, like, all women experience it to some extent, just some more than others. But again, they all experience this before menstruation. You have a lack of estradiol, you have a lack of progesterone. That affects mood. So it's more than just physiological in terms of the endometrium and myometrium. These affect the neurotransmitters that lead to our mood and well-being.